wheelchair. I needed to be sure that I'm not overweight because I'm also trying to manage my health due to sedentary lifestyle. Most of the things I do, I sit on a wheelchair or I do them sitting. And the health facility, even though it was a private one, did not have one skills to run me as a person with wheelchair. And so it sent a lot of worry in my part. Why? I started imagining, what if I was pregnant? What if I had family planning to go for? If you are pregnant or if you have done family planning or you go for family planning, you would agree with me that you need a weighing scale. You need to be weighed to access these services. So this also poses a huge gap for persons with disability. We don't have accessible facilities. The attitudinal biases by most healthcare workers and inadequate healthcare policies that address disability-specific needs, not gender needs. I'm not talking of male, female. A person with disability is either male or female. But I'm talking of addressing the needs. If a deaf person comes to a health facility, if a person on a wheelchair, if a person with albinism, if a little person, also known as a dwarf, comes to your health facility, if a blind person, do you have tactile stops that could help their needs? Sometimes our privacy is not there because people also ask third party for us to access our needs, and it's not right. We look at inaccessible public transportation. Of course, you know I should be in that studio now, but you know what happened? Yes. You know how the cost of transportation is. These are some of the things that nobody comes out to speak about them, but these things are eating deep. We desire to have social life, we desire to interact on equal basis with every other person, but of course it's not even happening. It's not even happening. And we look at the social support systems that we have very limited support systems and social welfare programs. Always you are hearing of palliative. Everywhere you go you hear of palliative. And my sister, I begin to wonder, is palliative sustainable? COVID has come and gone. What happened to these people who are aunties, uncles, mothers, fathers, and even youths with disabilities who live here in Abuja? How do they independently navigate their lives? You look at social exclusion and stigmatization, of course. Persons with disabilities in Abuja often experience discrimination and exclusion because there is a misconception around disability, which can lead to isolation. Trust me, I love to go out, I love to interact, I love to see what the state I live in is made up of. But when I remember some of these things, my sister, I just coil up on my bed. And I would rather not step out and have someone look at me as if I am someone who is from the other part of the world. And see, I don't look dirty, I don't look tidy. I'm a beautiful woman who has survived disability and living my best life at this point. Smell good, feel good, look fresh. And so it's not as if disability has brought about me not being able to compete with other persons who don't have disability, but because of the social exclusion and stigmatization that we have, you know, it has a way of making us just isolate ourselves. That's the word.
I must say that it's quite a struggle, and the challenges are quite enormous, especially the challenges faced by people with disabilities. And for a person like you who has survived polio for over 40 years, it must have been a very tough one for you, even though I see that you're quite resilient. Thank you so much for letting us in a bit about your story. I think it's quite inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much.
Yes. Okay, so now moving away from the challenges that are there.
Much too for having me.
Yes, moving away from the challenges that are there. Now there is a very glaring importance of inclusive governance and equal opportunities for people that are living with disabilities? I don't know, even though ordinarily we should know that everyone is equal because all of us are first human, but it is something that we'll have to continue to say. Can you speak more on the importance of inclusive governance and equal opportunity for people living with disabilities, or people with disabilities rather?
Thank you so much. Yes, we are people with disabilities. We are not living with disabilities because it's not a disease. When you live, it's a disease. So first, we have the Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Act of 2018, which is also known as the Disability Act. And the major aim of this particular act is to address many of the challenges faced by persons with disabilities in Nigeria, including Abuja, which is the Federal Capital Territory. And for our accessibility requirements, you would agree with me that looking at inclusive governance, when we have accessibility requirements, this act mandates that public buildings and transportation systems must be accessible to persons with disabilities. So new buildings must include accessible facilities, and existing ones were given a 5-year period, and this elapsed January this year.
Wow.
So this provision in itself addresses barriers to physical access and aims to improve independent mobility for persons with disability. But I'm actually coming from a bank now, and it will interest you to know that the bank actually does not have a ramp, even as big as it is, and I'm banking with them. I have a lot of transactions to do, and I had to call the management, and they go, "Oh, this is an old building. Are you kidding me? In 2024, this is an old building. We are not saying pull down the building. We are saying mainstream. Let's have inclusive features. Let's have a part where you construct to accommodate rooms." The Disability Act also, which speaks to governance and the welfare of persons with disabilities generally, including here, it speaks to equal employment opportunities. So this act prohibits discrimination against persons with disabilities in employment, and it mandates that employers must make reasonable accommodations to enable persons with disabilities to work. It requires the government to support the vocational training and address employment prospects by giving 5% of every employment to persons with disabilities. So can we actually say, we are looking at 95 to 5, can we actually say that for every employment that has happened in Nigeria in the last 5 years, that we've had 5% given to persons with disabilities?
A very pertinent question, I must say.
Again, the last very pertinent question, and that's why I'm throwing it open to both our listeners, ministries, departments, and agencies that work in those spaces. The Act also addresses inclusive education because it guarantees equal access for children with disabilities, ensuring they are not denied admission to schools based on their disabilities. And it also promotes inclusive education by advocating for reasonable accommodation in classrooms and the availability of assistive devices. My dear sister, even in our inclusive schools, within the SCP, can we begin to have these conversations, these honest conversations? Can we go to some of these schools to have some of this and have first-hand interviews to actually access the reality? Do they have reasonable accommodation? Do they have assistive technology? Are their staff trained to accommodate persons with disabilities? It speaks to healthcare, which was one of the areas I raised initially. And it requires that healthcare facilities provide accessible services and prohibits discrimination in accessing healthcare. So in all its ramifications, it supports receiving equitable and dignified healthcare. Again, I ask, And I also shared my own story of accessing healthcare.
Yes.
Was that equitable or was that dignified?
At all, not at all. Hello. Hello. Yes, we're with you. We can hear you now.
Because there was so if we are looking at include government. Thank you. So if we are looking at inclusive healthcare, can we begin to narrow it down to say how many of our health facilities, how many of our schools, how many of our ministries employ based on inclusion? Do we have social protection and financial support that targets persons with disabilities? I'm not talking of persons without disabilities, because this discussion is spotlighting persons with disabilities.
Yes.
So do we have social protection that in all its entirety drives inclusion and supports the poorest of the poor and even people who do not earn on equal basis? Do we have accessible public transportation? Because even the Act requires all transportation services for persons with disabilities to be accessible, and is mandating the installation of accessible features, which aims to, reduce the challenges in transport, moving around Abuja and even other cities. But can we say that this is in place?
It's hard to say.
I don't know.
It's hard
Maybe
to
we'll
say.
take up the conversation from there anyway.
Yes, it's actually very hard to say. Every morning when I cross the pedestrian bridge that is close to my house, before I get to the other side of the road, one thing comes to my mind. I keep wondering that how do the people with disabilities, how do they manage to cross over to the other side? Because the pedestrian bridge that I have around me, I have not seen any that has a provision for someone with disability. Because there is this stairs, there are stairs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the people with disabilities, how do they move from one point, like the express? I'll give an instance, like the airport road, for instance. If we live on the other side, how do you cross to the other side? Or when you're dropped on the other side and you need to cross over, how do you cross over? These are some of the very important questions that we should ask. And you just gave an instance of the bank. You went to the bank and it was difficult. And the excuse that was given was the fact that it's an old building. What happened to trying to make provision? Because like you said, an ultimatum was given, which is going to elapse this year, that provision should be made for inclusion, where everybody, including those with disabilities, would be socially included. But unfortunately, it is just very few organizations that are putting this in place to ensure that everyone has access to their buildings or even their services or facilities. It's very, very unfortunate. Hello.
Very, very, very.
Yes. So
it is.
Yes. So,
yes, it is.
You mentioned some of the policies that even though it's true that there have been some legislations, government has tried to do certain things, but when it comes to policies in Nigeria, policies have never been the problem for me, but the implementation. And that is why you see that even though these things are encapsulated in the laws, the implementation is still very minimal. What do you think are some of those barriers that are standing against the implementation of this inclusion?
For me, I would say the fact that while the Disability Act is progressive, it has progressive provisions, full implementation has been very slow. Very, very slow. And I think that one of the major barriers is the fact that the ministry responsibility of creating awareness, which is the Ministry of Information and Awareness. People do not know that persons with disabilities even have a law. They don't even know the provisions of the law. How will you enforce this provision when you don't even know that such laws exist. So I think we have limited awareness, we have enforcement gaps in the last 5 years. Has any organization, since it has elapsed, has any organization been brought to book because their facility does not have reasonable accommodation to accommodate the needs of persons with disability? And then funding constraints is another big barrier, as it were, because no matter how beautiful these promises in the law are, if there's no funding, then it's a huge gap. It's important that we also begin to look at strengthening advocacy and holding relevant bodies, duty bearers accountable. It is only when we hold the duty bearers accountable that we can ensure that the Act effectively addresses the day-to-day challenges faced by persons with disabilities, because it's not to speak the big grammar and be ambiguous.
Yes.
These are lived experiences. We start out every day. This is because you raised a concern about crossing the pedestrian bridge, and that's because you are looking with a disability lens, even though you don't have a disability. Most of these duty bearers do not look through with the disability lens. And we have Lagos, just in Nigeria, that have also created, pedestrian bridges that are accessible. So it's also important that we have, as relevant stakeholders, comparing, going to study what works in other states and bringing it, and also working with organizations of persons with disabilities. When they work with some of these organizations, it will be easier, for them to support them, help them to navigate. It will be easier for them to help them to at least point them to proper organizations, that will support them, because it's not about building. Are they using the right building codes? Even some of the ramps you see, they are death traps, and they even exacerbate the.
Some of them are worn out. They are old already. Hello. Hello, can you hear us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
sorry.
I'm right here with you.
Okay, so it's very important that they work with the relevant organizations of persons with disabilities, so that they are also working from a place of information and with the right building codes, so they don't just build a death trap in a bid to just have ramps at the entrance, so that we say, oh, they have ramps. No, we want accessible ramps using the building codes that work.
Now it's a whole lot. You said something that those that are in charge of making the policies, those that have the answers to all of these questions that would engender that inclusion, because I think somehow when it comes to these things, it also has to do with accountability. Away from making the decrees, can we have a more robust plan for implementation? Because even when we make the laws and we don't follow the laws, we are not going to achieve anything at the end of the day. And even the maintenance is another thing. Because you raised the point that some of these ramps that are made for persons with disabilities, some of them are old already, some of them have worn out, but there's little or no attention that is being paid. Because who is going there to inspect? Who is going there to check whether these ramps are okay? Or the latest bridges, do they have do they have access? Or do they create access for people with disabilities? These are some of the very important questions. And I'm hoping that this conversation today is going to bring to light with some of these challenges and the need for us to wake up, to understand that accessibility is not a feature in a society, but it is a fundamental right. Hello.
Yes, I'm with you. I'm right here.
Yes, and now with that, moving on to the other part. I know that we've done a lot, but obviously our a lot is not enough. What can we do, and how can we do it better to ensure that we increase representation and participation of people with disabilities?
I would say for one of the things we will do is what Eagle FM is doing right now, inviting a stakeholder.
Yes.
You understand? Or inviting someone with a disability to share their thoughts. It's not enough to speak to inclusion without including those who are concerned, those who are involved, those with lived experiences. Having persons with disability themselves share their stories, tell you what they need. You can't make decisions for me. I'm a human being. I should be able to make decisions that pertain to my life. So it's important that we begin to engage persons with disabilities themselves and have them at the decision-making tables. When you are raising awareness, you are inviting them, bringing them to full bear, for them to be able to continuously, advocacy can never be too much.
Of course.
Awareness can never be too much. Sensitization can never be too much. It's a continuous conversation. It's not a one-off thing. We need to continue to reiterate these things. Because I remember one of the courses I did some years back, it taught me that adults have difficulty in accepting change. And so people feel, bringing in people with disabilities it's not a lot of work. You are only creating reasonable accommodation. What if the bosses, the critical stakeholders we have, God forbid, because it's our language in this part of the world, comes down with a disability? Then we start running from pillar to post to make reasonable accommodation. And just like you said, inclusion is the new normal. Inclusion is the way to go. In developed countries, in developing countries, inclusion. So a country with over 35 million persons with disabilities, I think we are too much to be left, without treating our issues with seriousness, without addressing our concerns and ensuring that we mainstream disability concerns. So we would continue to raise our voices, we would continue to have this conversation from time to time, and we'll continue to raise awareness.
This is so incredible, and I must appreciate you for making our time to be with us here today. Even though not physically, you are here with us spiritually and of course virtually, and it's been an amazing time listening to you. I must say that you are a powerful woman, a woman that is very inspirational, and I must say I'm quite motivated by you this morning. Hello. Are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, I'm right here with you. I am.
Yes, thank you so much. I was just talking about the fact that you are a very powerful woman, an inspirational woman as well. And also, you've motivated us with your story. And of course, for speaking the truth to power. Thank you so much for granting us this interview.
Thank you so very much for having me, and I look forward to many more fruitful conversations moving forward. And I want to say thank you so much, Eagles FM 102.3 Abuja, for this opportunity to share our stories and spotlight our concerns.
Yes.
Inclusion is a win for everyone.
Of course.
When everyone is included, everyone wins. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just to add to that, I would say that equality is not equal without disability rights. And the empowerment begins when the stigma ends. And we must understand that disability is not a limitation. Society's exclusion is what is that limitation to our potential as a country.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We appreciate you for joining us here today. And like you said, we hope to have you again and again.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Right.
And enjoy the rest of your show.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your day too. Thank you for making our time to be with us.
Thank you.
All right, there you have it. We have been having a conversation with a gender and social inclusion advocate, talking about Ms. Susan Kelechi Ihoma. She's been talking about the need for inclusion, equal representation of everyone, regardless of what they look like or whatever form of physical or maybe unseen disability that they may have. Because at the end of the day, we all are humans. And one thing that we need to understand is that we are all equal before the sight of God. But the first thing that we must do to promote this is by inspiring empathy and understanding, looking at each other with that eye of equality by promoting accessibility and equality. How can we get there? It is only when we get to understand that equality is not equal without disability rights, because the real empowerment begins when the stigma ends. When we begin to, change our mindset. How do we engineer policies that will include these people? I was just basically raising a very vital concern about the fact that many, or if not all, I stand to say, or stand to be corrected, some of our bridges here, even in Abuja, our federal capital territory, that is supposed to be very inclusive, do not have some of these amenities for these people. I'm hoping that this means is going to be a way that we get to call ourselves to action. Both the policymakers, even we as ordinary citizens and followers, we get to make the right decisions, because our representatives need to do more to ensure that these people are represented. The rights of people with disabilities are represented, because disability is not the limitation, but the limitation is a society's exclusion. And